Hi Bobcats, this is Miss Lee, and in this lesson we're going to talk about absolute value. Make sure you have your notes and you're filling them out as we go along. The absolute value of a number is the number's distance from 0 on a number line. So let's take a look at the number line. Here is our 0. And we want to look at the number negative 3. How many units away from 0 is negative 3? It's 1, 2, 3 units. So the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Now, a couple of things to remember. First is distance. The distance is always, and I need you to write this down, always positive. Distance is always positive. If you're in gym class and the coach tells you to run 100 yards backwards, would you be running a negative 100 yards? No, it would still be a positive 100 yards because it's distance. The distance is always positive. The other thing is that the symbol for absolute value are two straight lines, and there would be a number inside, like negative 3, and it's read, the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. The absolute value of 3 is 3. Here's 3. What's the distance of 3 from 0? 1, 2, 3 units. Which is still positive because distance is always positive. So it does not matter if you have a negative integer inside the absolute value symbol or a positive. Its distance is always going to be positive, therefore its absolute value is always positive. So distance and absolute value is always positive. Now sometimes you might see this. And this is negative. And remember, negative is the opposite. It's the opposite of a positive. So this would read the opposite of the absolute value of negative 3. So you would have to find the absolute value of negative 3 first, which is 3, and then take its opposite. The opposite of 3, or a positive 3, is a negative 3. If you have the opposite of the absolute value of 5, what is the absolute value of 5? It's still 5 because absolute value is distance and it's always positive. Then you have to take the opposite of that 5, which would be a negative 5. So let's try some. If you've got this, then pause the video, go ahead and fill in the answers, find the absolute value of each of these in your notes, and then come back and check. If you need to work a little bit more together, then let's go ahead and get started. Here we go. This is read. The absolute value of 7 is 7. Absolute value is always positive. The absolute value of a negative 7 is 7 as well, because the absolute value of a number, doesn't matter if it's a positive or negative number, will always be positive. Here we have the absolute value of 7, but we want the opposite of it. The absolute value of a 7 is 7. Now take the opposite of 7, and that would be negative 7. This problem is read, the opposite of the absolute value of negative 7. So first we need to find the absolute value. The absolute value of negative 7 is 7, because absolute value is always positive. And then take the negative, or the opposite of that 7, and it is a negative 7. And the same holds true for absolute values of decimals and fractions. The absolute value of 3/10 is 3/10. The opposite of the absolute value of a negative 8 and 25/100. All right, we're going to have to break this down. First, find the absolute value of negative 8 and 25/100. Absolute value is always positive. And then find the opposite of that, and you would get a negative 8 and 25/100. What's the absolute value of a negative 3/4? Positive 3/4. So let's try some different examples. Excuse me. If the absolute value of g equals 18, which values for g are true? So we want to know which absolute value will equal 18. So let's go through them. What is the absolute value of 18? It's 18. That's what we want. So we know number 1 is true. What's the absolute value of 0? It's 0. So we don't want number 2. What's the absolute value of negative 18? Absolute value is always positive. So it's a positive 18, which is what we're wanting. And what's the absolute value of 81? It's 81. So the only values where it would be true would be 1 and 3, which is letter C. Okay, go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to go ahead and answer the following questions. Once you have your answers, come back and check and see how you did. Okay, A says, write the following values for the point of F. Here is F. Well, let's see. We have 0, 1, 2, 3. So we're counting by 1. So if this is a 3, 4, that means the point F has a value of 5. It's a positive 5 because it's to the right of 0. What is the opposite of a positive 5? Well, the opposite of a positive is a negative. And what's the absolute value of 5? 5. Which point best represents a withdrawal of $10? What does withdrawal mean? It means to take out. So it would be a negative 10. So which point represents a negative 10? Well, here's negative 9. Are we going to go negative 10, negative 11, negative 6? No. Negative 10 would be right here at point A. Which point represents the opposite of a decrease of 5 degrees? All right, let's see here. A decrease of 5. What integer represents a decrease of 5? Is it going to be a positive or a negative 5? Well, decrease means to get smaller or take away, so it's going to be a negative 5. And we want to know what is the opposite of that. The opposite would be a positive 5. And which letter represents a positive 5? Letter F. And how can you determine the absolute value of negative 7 using a number line? Make sure that you've answered this. Okay, I don't want you just to say what the answer is. I want you to write sentences describing how you would use this number line to find the absolute value of negative 7. And we'll discuss it in class. Once you've done that, go on to the next problem. Okay, last one. Which model shows the opposite of a negative 6? Okay, so we have a model, and there is a key that goes with the model. Here's your key over here. You always want to look for the keys. And the key tells us that if it's a filled-in solid circle, it's a negative 1. And empty circles represent a positive 1. We want to know which is the opposite of negative 6. So do you know what the opposite of negative 6 is? If you're not sure, model it. A negative 6 would be 6 filled in solid circles, so which would be C. So this would be a negative 6. But we want the opposite. So the opposite of 6 filled in circles would be what? 6 empty circles. So the opposite of a negative 6 would be a positive 6, or letter choice A. Nice job, Bobcats.